Well, it's been a long 3 days for Esther and Mordecai, because when we left them 2 weeks ago, we had told them that in 3 days, Esther had asked Mordecai and all the Jews who were assembled there in the city of Susa, to go and to pray, or not to pray, to fast. I guess it's implied that they would pray, but to fast on behalf of her, because she has been given now the order that Haman sent throughout all the kingdom of the Persians, that on the 13th day of the 12th month that they would gather together and they would destroy, annihilate, and kill all Jews. And you recall, as the passage that Brother Howard read for us this morning, that after she had sent back to Mordecai to let him know that you just can't go in and ask the king anything at any time, but that if you go into him and he's not wanting to see you, that it's just death. That he has to actually accept your presence and reach out his scepter. And when he told her, he said, don't think that being in the palace is going to keep you from receiving the same fate as all the rest of the Jews. And he said, who knows? If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's house will perish, and who knows if perhaps you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And so Mordecai and the Jews gather together for 3 days and fast, and Esther and her servants gather together for 3 days and they fast. And then on the third day, Esther puts on her royal robes as the queen and goes to see the king. Now, the vision that we get from reading the passage is that the way that it's set up is that the king is sitting on the other side of the room on his throne. And the people are coming into the inner court from the opposite side. And the king looks out across there and he sees Esther. Now, he hasn't asked for her for more than 30 days, but he sees his queen over there. And luckily, she receives good news from the king. And he invites her on in, and he extends forth the scepter, and she comes forth and she touches the tip of the scepter. And he asks her the question, he says, what is it that you want, queen? He realizes a couple of things. Number one, she's not just going to come for just any particular reason. She's not going to risk her life. She knows the law of the Persians. She's not going to risk her life by coming to me just for any old reason. So what is it that you request? What is it that you want? I'll give to you up to half of my kingdom. Now, that phrase, up to half of my kingdom, I think is kind of an idiom. It means that whatever it is that you want, you name it. I'll give you whatever that. He doesn't literally mean that we'll split the kingdom in half and you can have it. What he means is there's nothing too high that you can't ask. And so she uses great wisdom. And she says, if I please the king, if I find favor with the king, come to a feast that I have prepared for you, and bring also Haman with you. So he says, hurry, go get Haman. Go get Haman, and we're going to go in and we're going to feast with the queen. So they rush off and get him. And they come together and they feast, and then when the feast is done, the king again says, queen, what is it that you desire? What is it that you want? And the queen says, well, if I have found favor in your sight, if I am pleasing in your sight, come again tomorrow to another feast that I have for you, along with Haman, and then I will tell you what it is that I want. Okay, sounds like a plan. Now, think for just a minute. We have Haman. Remember the Agagite, the one who hates the Jews, the one who hates Mordecai, the one who has put together this decree that throughout all of the kingdom of Persia, that all the Jews would be killed on the 13th day of the 12th month. This man has something else to kind of put in his belt of pride. He is the only one, other than the king, that got to go to this feast. So he leaves this feast all joyful and happy. I mean, he's got another feather in the cap here, right? But as he's walking out, and he's passing by the gate, he sees this guy Mordecai. And it says that he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. So he goes on home. He controls it at this particular point, and he goes on home. And he gathers together his friends, and he brings his wife Zeresh together, and he starts to recount to them all the great things that he has done, and all the great blessings that have been heaped upon him because of how great that he is. How many sons that he has, how many riches that he has, the great honors that the king has set upon him. As a matter of fact, he says, there was a feast today with the queen, and the king and I were the only two that got to go. Just us two. But that means nothing to me, he said. It means nothing because of Mordecai the Jew. And because of the way that he treats me, that means nothing. He reminds me a lot, by the way, side note, of Ahab. Remember Ahab? Remember how he pouted when he couldn't get Naboth's vineyard? He laid on his bed and turned away and wouldn't answer to anybody. The king. Grown-up baby, right? That's basically what it was. That's what Haman reminded. None of this means nothing to me because of that Mordecai, that Jew. So his spouse and his friends say, well, here's an idea. Why don't you build a gallows? 50 cubits high, 75 feet, 50 cubits high. And then go in and ask your pal, the king, tomorrow morning. You go in and ask him that you may be able to put Mordecai on that you may be able to execute Mordecai on that. Great plan. We'll build it tonight. And they do. But during that same night, something else happens. The king is not able to sleep. He just can't go to sleep. They didn't have, I don't even know the names of the medicines. Is it Ambien? Ambien, or whatever the other ones are. They didn't have the whale music that they could put on behind them. They didn't have. So what they did he said, go get the records, go get the chronicles of my kingdom. Bring them here and let's read from them. So they go and get the chronicles, they go and get the records, and they open it up, and they're reading him about all the great things that he has done in his kingdom and the great things that have happened in his kingdom. And they come to this section, flipping through the scrolls, even though you don't flip through scrolls, flipping through the scrolls, and they get to this point that says, oh, there was a time when you had two of your guards, two of your eunuchs, who guarded your threshold, who planned and plotted against you to kill you. Bigthan and Teresh, I believe was their name. Something close to that. It's in chapter 6, around verse 2 or 3. And there was a guy that gave us that information that they wanted to do that. And we found out, and they didn't kill you, we executed them. And that guy's name, by the way, was Mordecai. Well, what did we do for Mordecai, the king asked. Nothing. Nothing. We didn't do anything for the guy that helped save my life. We need to do something. And he starts looking for advice and counsel. He asked for that a lot. He says, who's out in my court? Well, Haman just came in. The Haman that is going there this morning to ask the king if he can have Mordecai to execute him on this gallows that he has built. Haman's out there. Bring him in. Now again, if you're picturing yourself and you're putting yourself in Haman's shoes, you just got there this morning and the king's already asking for you. Wow, man, I'm the most important guy in the place. And he comes in, and the king, before Haman can even start to ask for anything, the king asks him a question. What would you do for the man that the king wants to honor? Well, hey, he must be thinking about me, right? I mean, who else would he want to honor other than me, Haman? He's already making me basically second in the kingdom. He's wanting to do something else for me. Well, here's what I would do, king. I would take the robes that you have worn. I would get a horse that you have ridden on. I would get one of those crowns that you have worn in the past, and I would put all of those onto this man that you want to honor, and then you go and you get one of your most noble officials, and you have him take this man that's dressed in all of this royal robes, who basically is king, because he's putting on all the kingly stuff. You put him, and you have this most noble official walk him around the square. You put him going right downtown, and you say, you let him call out, this is what will happen to the person that the king wants to honor. Now, that's exactly what Haman wanted to happen to him. That's what he wanted. And the king says, great idea. You go get that stuff, don't leave any of it out, and go get Mordecai and do that to Mordecai. And it just went, ugh, right? That was the sucker punch, the gut blow, whatever you want to call it. He had no idea that that was coming. But I mean, what choice did he have? Right? What choice did he have? So he got all the stuff, and he went and he got Mordecai and he put him on the horse, the royal horse, and he walks him around. This is what will happen to the man that the king wants to honor. And then he takes him back to the king's gate, and he drops him off, and he hurries home humiliated and mad. And he gets home, and he tells his wife what an awful day that he had. And then it, probably one of the more humorous things in the book to me. In Esther chapter 6, when he has returned home and all of his friends are there and his wife are there, and what kind of a bad day that he had, then they say, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. Now, if I'm Haman at that particular time, I go, time out. You knew who he was when you told me to build the gallows. Because if you look back at chapter, he says, Mordecai the Jew. And now you're changing your tune. What's up? Right? I know you young folks don't say, what's up anymore, but we say, what's up? Okay? That's what we said when I was a kid, all right? What do you mean? Well, he's still, I'm guessing he's still complaining, he's still whining, he's doing all of this stuff. And at that particular time, here comes the king's eunuchs. Because remember, this is the day that Queen Esther has her second feast scheduled for the king to come and for Haman to come. And so they come and get him, and they hurry him up to get to the feast, because you can't be late to the feast with the queen. It's a no-no. So they get to the feast. And they've eaten at the feast, and the king is now enjoying the wine that he's drinking after the feast. And he asks the queen again, what is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled. By this time, you would think that the king is pretty interested in what she wants. And she finally tells him. And she says, my wish, if I find favor in your sight, if I'm pleasing in your sight, my wish is that you will save my life and the lives of my people. King, if we were just being put into slavery, I wouldn't even bring it up to you. But we're going to be killed. I'm asking for my life. And you can, there's two faces that I'm picturing during this. The one is the face of the king who's going, what? Who? And he asked that in just a second. And the other one is probably the face of Haman who's going, oh no. Because remember, oh no, remember, she has not told anybody who her people is so far. And so now he is probably gathering, doing the old 2 + 2, And the king says, who's so bold to do this? Who would do this? A foe and an enemy, this Haman. A foe and an enemy. Well, the king is outraged. Outraged. So much so that he can't even sit there any longer. He has to get up and go out into the garden area. And that leaves Esther, and it leaves Haman there in the room, along with the servants. And Haman is probably sitting there thinking, okay, what options do I have? I can go after the king. And no, you don't want to go after the king. That's not going to work out real well. I can run away. Well, you're not going to get very far. Or I can beg for mercy from the queen. That's pretty much it, right? That's pretty much your options. So he goes with number 3, but in the way that he does it, the king comes back into the room, and it almost looks as if he's trying to attack the queen. And so they quickly take something and cover Haman's face, which is just a signal that he is about to receive punishment from the king. And then, one of the eunuchs, his name was Harbana, says, King, there is a gallows. There's one 75 feet high. It's at Haman's house. He was going to use it to execute the same guy that we talked about earlier today that saved your life, Mordecai. He says, that's great. Go use it. But use it for Haman. And that very same day it says that the king also gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And then also at that time, Esther says, it's time for you to know who Mordecai really is and what he means to me. And she tells the king. And so the king calls in Mordecai. And he gives to Mordecai that same signet ring that he had taken from Haman, the signet ring that shows that you have the authority of the king, and he gives it to Mordecai. And you say, well, great, that's the end of the... No, that's not the end of the story yet. Because remember, when that decree went out in the first month, that in the 12th month, on the 13th day of the month, that all the Jews in the kingdom would be annihilated, destroyed, killed. They can't revoke that. Their laws are such that you can't revoke it. And so Esther, again, pleads with the king. She basically says, how can I go on knowing that this is going to happen to my people? So the king calls Mordecai over and essentially says, I can't take back the law. You know that. But here's what you can do. You can issue another edict and use my ring to seal it, to show that this is my wish. And you do what you think you must in order to help your people. That's essentially what they said. Because you can't get rid of the law, but you can issue another one that kind of counteracts it. And so they call together the scribes. This is now in the 3rd month. They call together the scribes. And they write this law out that says all the Jewish people can protect themselves. You can gather together and you can protect yourselves against all your enemies who will attack you, be it man, woman, child. Even say you can take the plunder. And they take that law and they send it out by royal horsemen, the ones that have been bred to go fast and far. And they go throughout all of the kingdom. And everywhere it goes, the Jewish people rejoice. They celebrate that they can gather together and protect themselves. And so, according to how you count, 8 months, 9 months later, the day comes. And on that day, on the day when the Jews' enemies thought that they would have master over them, it tells us in Esther chapter 9 and verse 2 that it was reversed. the Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. In the city of Susa, 500 men were killed. Throughout the rest of the kingdom, 75,000. The news was brought to the king of what had happened. And he goes to Esther and says, is there anything else? She says, well, here in the city we need one more day. So one more day they fight against their enemies. 300 more men. And I'm leaving out the part about Haman's sons, but make sure you read. And so now, on the 13th and the 14th day, the 13th in all the other areas and the 13th and 14th in the city, the Jews have mastered over their enemies. And they send out, Esther and Mordecai send out proclamations throughout the lands for the Jews to remember these days in which the Jewish people were delivered. It's the holiday of Purim for the Jewish people, and it's celebrated even to this day. The story of Esther and Mordecai. Very quickly, I want us to look at just a couple of things that we can learn, and we've mentioned some of these as we've gone through the story. We've mentioned some of these last week, but I just want to very, very quickly run through these. Number one, a lesson that we can learn from Mordecai and from Esther is that being faithful means making the best of bad situations. You're not always going to be in the best situation in life. Sometimes circumstances are going to be beyond our control, and we're going to be put in situations where it may not be easy. But they're a good example of doing the best you can with what you've got. We remain faithful even in bad situations. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4 helps us to understand that no matter what situations that we're in, we can find comfort in God. If we can find comfort in God only by doing His will, though. We can find hope in God, it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 9 and 10. Paul says in Philippians chapter 4, verses 11 through 13, that he found himself in all sorts of situations, but no matter what situation that he found himself in, he could be content because he knew that he could do all things, Philippians 4 and verse 13, through Christ who strengthened him. Being faithful means not just being faithful in good times, but being faithful in bad times and in bad situations, whether it's of our own doing or not. Another thing that we can learn is that the world will always, I'd use the air quotes on that one, always be against God's people. And I say it that way because, let's face it, we live in a country where we have a lot of blessings associated with our country. And so those aspects of our lives are not against us, they're for us. But there are a lot of other things in our society that go against us. So it's not technically always. But the world in general will be against God's people, as they were here. Mordecai and the Jewish people were going to be destroyed by Haman because he hated the Jews. The world, Jesus tells us in Luke chapter 6, verses 22 and 23, they're going to revile you. They're going to persecute you. They're going to say all manner of evil against you falsely for His sake. If we're doing what's right, they're going to say some things about you. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 12 talks about that they will talk bad about you. 2 Timothy chapter 3 verses 12 and 13 says, yea, all who will live godly lives shall suffer persecution. Not might, not possibly, shall. 1 John 3 and verse 13, he says, don't be surprised that the world hates you. The world hates you. And then Ephesians 6 verses 11 and 12, you might say, well, what's that got to do with the world hating you? Why do you think Jesus tells us to put on our armor? It's because the world, the spiritual world of darkness, is against us. So we need to be aware of that. The world is going to be against us, and we must be ready and willing to stand up. Just as Mordecai was ready and willing. Just as Esther was ready and willing. Number 3. Don't allow one bad thing to overshadow all the good in our lives. Now see, this is a lesson that I got from Haman. You remember what he said when he got to his house? He was telling his wife and all of his friends all the great things that he had going on. He has 10 sons. He has all these riches. He has all these honors. He got to go to the feast with just the queen and the king themselves. But none of this matters because of that man Mordecai. Really? But how often do I overlook all the blessings that I have, and I focus on that one little thing that someone said or someone did, instead of realizing, oh, I have so much. Don't allow the one bad thing to overshadow all the good things and prevent us from serving the way that we should. Number 4, God can work through the simple, seemingly insignificant events to help his people. Not one grand miracle in the book. Not one time when God reached down and stopped the rivers and parted them, or made the day go twice as long, or brought fire and hail from the sky. None of that. God has done that, but not in this particular book. And yet God still helped his people. Through the simple, sometimes imperceptible, insignificant events, God can still help. We just must look for those things sometimes and not let them slide by. One final lesson. God can call the reverse. You see, when I was in junior high and high school, hopefully not high school as much, but in junior high, I played football. I played football through both. But in junior high, my junior high football coach was a man by the name of Coach Eubanks. Coach Eubanks was 6'10" and about 400 pounds. He was the basketball coach who said, hey, by the way, we don't have a junior high football coach. All right, I'll go out there. His football practices consisted of standing out there in our astro dirt. That's what we called it, the astro dirt, because there was no grass. It was just dirt. And we stood out there, and we draw stuff on the ground. We're going to run this, we're going to go over here. And then at the end of practice was him getting his folding chair, popping it open, sitting down, and blowing the whistle for us to run, because he was a basketball coach. He didn't know what to do, so we just ran all day. You didn't need to know all that, but I gave it to you anyways. So, but one of the favorite plays to draw was the old reverse. Right? You're going one way, nope, we're going back the other way. God called a reverse in Esther. Did you notice that? Multiple times. With Queen Esther, she was an orphan. He called a reverse. She's got Mordecai. She's a slave, a concubine. Nope, reverse. She's a queen. The Jews are going to be killed. Nope. Mordecai is going to be hung on the gallows. Nope. Look how many times they called a reverse. And the thing is, he calls a reverse for us. In the book of Ephesians chapter 2, in Ephesians chapter 2, it tells us the direction that we have been going. It tells us that we are dead in our sins and our trespasses, the ones in which we once walked. But then it says that God can call a reverse. But God, being rich in mercy because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up with him, and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace and kindness toward us in Christ Jesus. For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing, it is a gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. I love this point. I didn't come up with this point, by the way. I heard it from another guy. Okay, so I'm not calling originality. I'd tell you his name, but I can't pronounce it. He called a reverse. He says, yes, you were dead in your trespasses and sins. Yes, I have given you my son. Yes, you once followed the course of this world and you were doing your own thing. Yes, I've called a reverse. You can now serve me and do good works. But the choice is ours. God's called the play. Now we have to implement it. We have to execute the play. So you can draw it up all day long, right? You can draw up all you want to on the ground, on the astrodirt, but if you don't execute the play, it doesn't do you any good. So what about you? God is calling for you to be on His team, to be in His family, and He's done everything possible to make that a reality. But you must choose to serve Him. If you're here tonight and you've never obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ, why not now? Why not tonight? Let faith be active in your life, not just believing who He is, not just saying that, yes, I understand that, but actually following Him, being obedient to Him. If there's any way that we can help you, won't you come while we stand and while we sing?